Compassion is the lifeline that keeps humanity from sinking into cruelty. Without compassion, we are adrift in dangerous waters, tossed by waves of selfishness, battered by storms of indifference. Compassion is what pulls us back when the current of hatred tries to carry us away. Compassion is what steadies the ship when pride and arrogance try to capsize our souls. Compassion is not an accessory. It is not an optional virtue. It is the very rope that God throws to a drowning world and says, hold on, you don't correct. You don't have to sink in bitterness. You don't have to drown in anger. You don't have to be consumed by cruelty. Compassion is the hand that lifts, the voice that comforts, the heart that understands. Think about it. Compassion is the reason humanity has survived through every storm of history. When people have fallen, compassion picked them up. When nations have suffered, compassion stretched across borders to bring healing. When families were torn apart, compassion stitched together the pieces. It is the lifeline, the cord that connects one heart to another, the bridge that spans the gap between despair and hope. Without it, we are nothing more than creatures clawing for survival, but with it, we become reflections of the divine, carriers of light in a world so desperate for warmth. Cruelty is always waiting in the shadows, always searching for an opportunity to rise. And the moment compassion loosens its grip, cruelty takes control. Cruelty does not need an invitation. It rushes in where compassion has been silenced. It shows itself in harsh words, in cold hearts, in selfish choices. Cruelty grows when compassion is absent. Where there is no kindness, harshness reigns. Where there is no mercy, judgment rules. Where there is no love, hatred thrives. But as long as compassion is alive, cruelty is kept in chains. As long as compassion is practiced, darkness is pushed back. As long as compassion is chosen, humanity remains humane. Compassion is not pity. Compassion is not looking down on someone and feeling sorry. Compassion is stepping into another person's pain, seeing their struggle as your own, and saying, I will not let you carry this alone. Compassion is the heartbeat of love in action. It is what turns sympathy into service. It is what transforms concern into commitment. Compassion moves us beyond words into deeds, beyond feelings into faith, beyond good intentions into powerful impact. It is the lifeline because it refuses to let people drown in their suffering without reaching for them. Look at the world around us. So many people are sinking. Some are sinking in loneliness, crying out silently with no one to hear them. Some are sinking in poverty, working tirelessly but never finding relief. Some are sinking in shame, buried under mistakes and regrets that no one else can see. Some are sinking in grief, broken by losses they cannot put into words. And the tragedy is not just their pain. The tragedy is when the world turns its eyes away, when compassion grows cold, when people walk by without reaching out their hand. That is how cruelty takes hold, not just through active harm, but through passive indifference. When we stop caring, cruelty starts winning. Compassion is not weakness. Compassion is courage. It takes courage to see pain and not look away. It takes courage to open your heart when it is easier to close it. It takes courage to give when it is safer to withhold. It takes courage to feel when the world tells you to harden yourself. If the easy path is cruelty, it requires no effort to ignore, no strength to dismiss, no sacrifice to remain unmoved. But compassion demands strength, it demands sacrifice, it demands the willingness to risk your comfort to rescue someone else's hope. That is why compassion is a lifeline. It is extended at a cost, but it saves lives in the process. You still a love that refuses to let go. Every act of compassion may seem small to you, but it is a rope to someone else. A kind word to a weary soul is a rope. A meal shared with the hungry is a rope. A visit to the lonely is a rope. A hand on the shoulder of the grieving is a rope. And every rope extended pulls someone closer to safety, pulls someone back from the edge of cruelty, pulls someone away from despair. Compassion is not about grand gestures. It is about consistent lifelines thrown again until humanity remembers it was made to love, not to harm, to heal, not to wound, to lift, not to crush. Cruelty thrives where compassion is starved. Look at history and you will see that every rise of evil was preceded by the death of compassion. Genocide begins when people stop seeing others as human. Oppression begins when compassion is stripped from policy and law. Division begins when compassion is silenced by pride. Families break when compassion is replaced with selfishness. Communities collapse when compassion is replaced with greed. But restoration begins when compassion returns. Healing begins when compassion rises. Unity begins when compassion is practiced. Compassion is not just a lifeline for the individual, it is the lifeline for the world. There is power in compassion to disarm cruelty. You can argue with hatred and it grows louder. You can fight anger with anger and it burns hotter. But show compassion in the face of cruelty and it loses its sting. Compassion does not play by the rules of evil. It rises higher. It speaks softer but carries greater weight. It moves slower but heals deeper. It is underestimated because the world values power, but compassion carries a power that cannot be measured. It changes hearts, it reshapes destinies, it rewrites stories. It is the lifeline that says to humanity, your vision correct. You don't have to sink, you don't have to drown, you don't have to be swallowed by cruelty, because there is still a hand reaching for you, still a heart that cares for when compassion withers, hatred, pride, and indifference rise to take its place. Compassion is not a decoration. It is not an accessory to life. It is the very soil in which mercy and kindness grow. When that soil dries up, when it is neglected, when the heart refuses to water with empathy, weeds of cruelty begin to sprout. Compassion does not vanish in silence. It dies when it is starved. And the moment it dies, the vacancy does not stay empty. Hatred moves in with fury. Pride takes its throne. Indifference builds its walls. And suddenly, humanity that was meant to love begins to turn against itself. Hatred never needs much to grow. It does not require a great injustice. Sometimes it only requires the absence of compassion. Hatred feeds on misunderstanding. It thrives on unresolved wounds. It multiplies where compassion once brought healing. And hatred, once it rises, blinds the eyes, hardens the heart, and poisons the soul. It makes enemies out of friends, strangers out of neighbors, and monsters out of ordinary men. Hatred rises in the silence of compassion's absence. And once it rises, it spreads like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Pride too finds its strength when compassion weakens. Pride says, I will not stoop to understand you. I will not lower myself to forgive you. I will not extend myself to help you. Pride thrives where compassion has been silenced because compassion requires humility. Compassion says, your pain matters as much as mine. Compassion says, I will bend to lift you up. Compassion says, I am not greater than you. We are in this together. But when compassion withers, pride stretches tall like a tree with deep roots. It blocks the light. It overshadows mercy, and it convinces the heart that self is enough and others are unnecessary. Indifference is perhaps the most dangerous of all because it does not rage like hatred. It does not boast like pride. It simply looks away. Indifference does not scream, it whispers. It does not strike, it shrugs. Indifference is the coldness that lets cruelty thrive unchecked. It is the silence in the face of injustice, the apathy in the face of suffering, the stillness when action was needed most. And once indifference rises, entire communities suffer because no one cares enough to intervene, no one feels enough to respond, no one loves enough to change. Indifference is the graveyard where compassion is buried, and from its soil grows the roots of evil unseen until it is too late. When compassion withers, it is not only individuals who are affected. It is families, it is communities, it is nations. A family without compassion becomes a battleground of selfishness, where arguments never end and healing never begins. A community without compassion becomes divided, suspicious, and cold, where no one looks out for the other. A nation without compassion becomes cruel, harsh, and unyielding, where laws lack mercy and people lack humanity. When compassion dies, hatred, pride, and indifference rise, not just in people, but in systems, in structures, in cultures. Until cruelty is not the exception, but the norm, compassion is not fragile. It is powerful, but it must be protected. It must be nurtured like a flame, for when the flame dies, darkness takes the room. Hatred needs no invitation. Pride needs no permission. Indifference needs no push. They come as intruders, and once they enter, they do not leave willingly. That is why when compassion withers, everything else begins to unravel. Without compassion, forgiveness becomes impossible because hatred insists on revenge. Without compassion, humility disappears because pride insists on superiority. Without compassion, mercy vanishes because indifference insists on silence. Compassion is the anchor, and when it is removed, the ship drifts to stormy seas of cruelty. Hatred will tell you that it is justified. It will tell you that anger is strength, that vengeance is power, that bitterness is security. Pride will tell you that you do not need anyone, that you are enough by yourself, that to bend is weakness. Indifference will tell you that it is not your problem, that it is not your responsibility, that someone else will take care of it. These voices are loud when compassion withers, and they sound convincing but they are lies. They do not build, they destroy. They do not heal, they wound. They do not unite, they divide. And every time compassion weakens, these voices rise louder, filling the silence. Compassion, once commanded compassion, is the balance that keeps these forces from overtaking the heart. When you feel hatred rising, compassion reminds you to forgive. When you feel pride swelling, correct. Compassion reminds you to bow. When you feel indifference creeping in, compassion reminds you to act. Without it, you have no defense. Without it, you have no shield. Without it, you have no anchor. Hatred, pride, and indifference are not passive. They are active, waiting to fill the void. That is why compassion must never be allowed to wither. It must be fed daily with love, with kindness, with empathy, with mercy. The truth is, we live in a world where compassion is often treated as weakness. We glorify pride, we justify hatred, we normalize indifference. But the more compassion withers, the stronger the shadows grow. We see it in broken families. We see it in divided nations. We see it in violence that seems to have no end. These are not just political problems. These are compassion problems. Somewhere along the way, compassion was left to wither, and in its place rose hatred, pride, and indifference, choking out the humanity we're meant to carry. But it does not have to be this way. A single act of compassion can begin to turn the tide. A single choice to forgive instead of hate can silence bitterness. A single act of humility instead of pride can restore unity. A single step of care instead of indifference can spark hope where there was despair. Compassion may wither, but it can be revived. It may fade, but it can be rekindled. And every time it rises, hatred, pride, and indifference are pushed back, driven out, silenced by the power of love in action. Reviving compassion is the only way to silence the voice of evil. Evil speaks loud. When compassion is dead, it echoes through division. It shouts through cruelty. It whispers through indifference. Evil does not need permission to rise. It rises whenever compassion falls. But compassion, when revived, when breathed back into life, when stirred in the heart of men and women, becomes the weapon that evil cannot withstand. Compassion is not passive. It is not weakness. It is not soft. Compassion is strong enough to heal wounds, bold enough to cross barriers, powerful enough to break chains. Compassion is the sound of God's love manifested through human hands, human words, human hearts. Evil thrives on silence. It thrives when people look away, when people shrug, when people stop caring. But compassion disrupts the silence. Compassion speaks when others are quiet. Compassion moves when others stand still. Compassion acts when others retreat. Evil feeds on division, but compassion builds bridges. Evil feeds on pride, but compassion humbles itself to lift another. Evil feeds on hatred, but compassion forgives even when forgiveness feels impossible. Evil loses its grip every time compassion rises. Every time love is put into action, every time mercy is extended to someone who does not deserve it but desperately needs it. Reviving compassion requires courage, because the world will tell you to harden your heart. The world will tell you to protect yourself, to only look out for you, to never let anyone get close enough to hurt you again. But that is how evil gains ground, because a hardened heart cannot carry compassion. A closed hand cannot give, and a closed heart cannot love. Reviving compassion means daring to feel again, daring to care again, daring to extend your hand even when the world tells you to pull it back. It means refusing to let bitterness be your story, refusing to let anger be your identity, refusing to let cruelty have the last word. Compassion is the voice that answers when evil tries to speak. When evil says hate them, compassion says love them. When evil says curse them, compassion says bless them. When evil says walk away, compassion says stay. When evil says they don't matter, compassion says they are a child of God. Evil has a voice, but compassion has an answer. Evil may roar like a lion, but compassion is the shepherd that stands guard. Evil may whisper in the shadows, but compassion shines a light that makes every lie lose its power. Reviving compassion is not just about kindness, it is about warfare. It is the battle cry against every darkness that seeks to destroy humanity. Reviving compassion transforms not only hearts, but entire atmospheres. Walk into a room with hatred and you feel tension, bitterness, fear. Walk into a room with compassion and suddenly the air shifts, peace settles, hope awakens. Reviving compassion is not about changing the whole world in a moment. It is about changing the space around you until light begins to push back the dark. Compassion revives broken marriages when partners choose forgiveness over pride. Compassion restores communities when neighbors choose unity over division. Compassion renews nations when leaders choose mercy over power. Wherever compassion rises, evil is forced to be silent, because compassion carries an authority that cruelty cannot compete with. But reviving compassion takes intention. It does not happen by accident. Compassion will not rise if it is not chosen. Every day you wake up, you are faced with opportunities to be indifferent, to be selfish, to be proud. But reviving compassion means waking up and choosing love anyway. It means choosing to care even when it costs you. It means choosing to forgive even when you are still hurting. It means choosing to listen even when you disagree. It means choosing to lift someone else even when you feel weak yourself. Compassion must be revived again and again, because evil never sleeps and silence will always give it room. Evil has many forms. It can be cruelty, injustice, greed, violence, neglect, but compassion answers every form. Where there is cruelty, compassion brings kindness. Where there is injustice, compassion brings fairness. Where there is greed, compassion brings generosity. Where there is violence, compassion brings peace. Where there is neglect, compassion brings care. Evil has strategies, but compassion has solutions. Evil has voices, but compassion has power. The world does not need more hatred. It does not need more pride. It does not need more indifference. The world needs compassion, revived, renewed, restored, poured out like living water on dry ground. Compassion is revival in itself. It revives the brokenhearted. It revives the hopeless. It revives the weary. It revives the lost. But it also revives the giver. When you show compassion, something comes alive in you. You discover strength you didn't know you had, joy you didn't know you carried, peace you didn't know you were missing. Compassion is not only for others, it is for you. It keeps your heart soft in a hard world. It keeps your soul light in a heavy world. It keeps your spirit alive in a dark world. That is why reviving compassion is the only way to silence evil, because it not only heals the victim, it transforms the vessel. Reviving compassion is also contagious. One act of compassion can inspire another. One gesture of kindness can spark a chain reaction. One word of encouragement can echo through generations. Evil rises through fear and division, but compassion rises through love and multiplication. When compassion is revived in one heart, it can spread like fire to a family, a community, a city, a nation. Evil tries to silence compassion. But once compassion is revived, it cannot be silenced, because it is louder than hatred, stronger than pride, deeper than indifference. Compassion is the sound of heaven invading earth, and evil cannot stand against it. Evil may try to rise, but compassion will always have the final word if it is revived. Compassion is not an option, it is a necessity. It is the breath of life in a dying world, the balm for wounds no one else sees, the bridge across divides no one else dares to cross. Evil thrives in the absence of compassion, but it dies in its presence. Reviving compassion is the only way to silence the voice of evil